Good day, everyone. Today is September 15th, 2016, and we're at the beginning of today's webinar titled Using Social Media to Promote and Achieve Grant Outcomes. I'm your host for today's event, Mike Lasecki. Let me tell you a little bit about the webinar details. You'll be in listen-only mode using your computer or phone for audio, and in the question window, you'll have plenty of opportunities to ask questions. The webinar is being recorded, and you'll be sent a link to the recording and to the slides as well. This webinar is brought to you by the Centers Collaborative for Technical Assistance with additional support by the ATE Centers project. What is the Centers Collaborative? Well, it's led by 5 ATE centers, and you can see them listed here. CTC, the Skates Center in South Carolina, Florida ATE Center, BioLink in San Francisco, and the Networks Resource Center here at the Maricopa Community Colleges. The purpose of this project is responding to requests from the Department of Labor to provide technical assistance to a broad spectrum of grantees, particularly from those from the Department of Labor tax side as well as those from the NSF ATE side. Our deliverables are topical webinars like this one and convenings which occur often in the summer associated with the High Technology Impact Exchange Conference. Let's start today by asking a question of you. I'd like to know about your affiliation, so just a moment here, I'm going to launch this poll. You'll see the poll on the screen. And just go ahead and please click on the buttons, and then I'll display the results in just a moment. So you pretty much know that you're involved with an NSF grant, a tech grant, both or neither. Okay, everyone's piling in their results. Come on, folks, let's just finish clicking the buttons. It's not hard. We're almost done. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Counting down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see who we have today. I'm going to close the poll, and now I'm going to show the results of the poll. And there it is. It's very interesting. We've got a nice split today, roughly equal amount members from both the NSF and the tax side. Significant number of us having both grants and some showing neither. So that's great. So welcome today. We want to know that information. Let me go ahead and close this poll. And there we go. Let's move forward. Here's a second polling question for you. Many of us have convened our colleagues and are sitting around a conference table or a speakerphone, and they're listening to today's webinar. So would you please respond to that? Take us just a moment. Here comes the poll. There we go. So go ahead and click none, 1, 2, 3, or more. And thank you for this. Oh, lots of results pouring in. Good. So either you're by yourself or you're have some colleagues with you. Okay, closing the poll now. I'll count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There, it's closed. Let's take a look at the results. There they are. Most of us are by ourselves, but quite a few have 1, 2, or 3 or more people. Good. Thank you for responding to that poll. Let's close that out. Excellent. Let's move forward. It's my pleasure today to introduce today's presenters. I'm going to start with Ann Beheeler. Ann is the Executive Director of the National Convergence Technology Center. Welcome, Ann. Say hello to everyone, and please introduce your co-presenters.
Thank you, Mike. I will at this time introduce the co-presenters. Gordon Snyder is currently the Associate Director for the Optech Center. But I would say that he is as close as you can get to a digital native with social media, though I don't think he would say he's 30 anymore, Mike. I have to say that he's been doing social media or using social media since it very first came out, when I would look at him incredulously and wonder what he was doing. So I know that he's an expert, and I look forward to hearing from him today. Also, we have Joe Ippolito. Joe is with the Education Development Center. He's a Senior Project Director, and he's actually the PI on a research grant that we're going to talk a little bit about today. Today's focus is not specifically that grant, although that's part of the overall picture that we want to talk about. Next slide. I like to talk about an agenda. I think it's important for us to set the context of who we are and why we're talking to you. There actually are two NSF ATE centers involved. One is mine, the National Convergence Technology Center, that focuses on IT and communications. And then Gordon actually was the PI for the National Center for Information and Communications Technologies for many, many years. It was one of the first national centers within the ATE program. And that is his context for today, plus just the fact that he has been involved in social media forever. And when I talk about several projects, there are projects all over the place in social media, but we're specifically going to call out a couple of projects from the Education Development Center, and Joe is with us to help us on some of that. We will go right away, though, into planning tips that you have to consider before you begin a social media campaign. Social media is easy, right? Well, maybe not if you're actually trying to accomplish grant goals or project goals. It's technical, yes, that's a given. It also requires knowledge of marketing, and I would offer that most of us that are techies are not necessarily really great marketeers in messaging especially. And then it also requires some administrative considerations. Will your college allow you to even do a campaign that is not focusing on the overall college? Then we're going to talk about the tools themselves and their suggested use and frequency of use, and Gordon's going to cover those too. Then I'll talk a little bit about the current research project framework. It is more than tools, and we'll talk about some of the things we've learned. And then Joe will finish up talking about the foundation that came for our research project from the EDC, and also more resources. Next slide. As I've said pretty much all along, EDC's NSF ATE New Media Technician Project is part of the background. That project was at EDC, created some tools and training and best practices that were a springboard for the research project that we're doing right now. And then Gordon's work through the National Center for ICT, and also his work just because he loves social media and just is engaged in it. I mean, I think Gordon actually did podcasts before most of us knew what a podcast was. And then the National Convergence Technology Center, which is my center, and we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about that. The Convergence Technology Center has been in business as a regional first and then now as a national since 2004. But the operative point of this, I mean, we're doing all sorts of fun things that I would invite you to check on and contact me about. But the important part here is we have a community of practice with 57 colleges and universities involved. And why is that important? Well, for a research project, you need to have a group that can work together, can learn from each other, and we had a ready-made group in our group of 57 colleges. As a matter of fact, I will talk a little bit more about that a bit later, but we put the call out for those who might be interested, and we had 9 responses out of this group that were interested in being part of what we're doing. Let's go to the next slide, which is another poll. Okay, here's our poll, and the actual poll you see is going to look just a little bit different from this because we ran into some limitations on the number of items that we could have on it. Would you please take a moment and vote on this poll? And if you have some other tool that you are using, you might put it in the chat box and we'll try to capture it there.
And the attendees have access to the question box, but we can all see it there, and I'll report to you what we see in the chat.
Okay.
So everyone.
Well, the question box, that's fine.
Right. Bunch of people are responding. Boy, their responses wouldn't surprise you. They're using lots of these different tools. Let's give them one more moment, Ann, and then I'll show the results. Moment. I'm going to count down, Ann. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, folks, you're closing the poll. Let's take a look and see, Ann, what they thought. The majority, Facebook.
Okay.
Followed by a close second is Twitter, then LinkedIn. Snapchat's pretty far down there at 6%. And then in our question window, several people mentioned Google Plus and Instagram as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's go back to our slides.
I'll move ahead.
And
Oops.
at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Gordon, who's going to talk to us about tips and tools. Gordon, take it away.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Ann, for the introduction. I wish I was 30 years old again. And the next slide, Mike. Let's talk about some of the different tips and tools, but first, how to plan. As Ann said, it really it seems pretty simple, but when you're using it to accomplish some of your grant goals, it becomes a lot more complex, I think. Requires time, some training, and more than just the tool usage. We'll talk about some of those things. Consistency, persistence. You need to really focus in on your goals and demographics and not get sidetracked with some of the noise. Requires a lot of planning on your messaging and the content. You want to pay attention to those analytics, what's working, what's not working, and you want to track your results and adjust, do some formative adjustment as you go through the process. Next slide. Okay, one of the most important things, or some of the more important things, you want to, again, know your goals. You know, who's your target audience? You want to define your key messages and themes and try to stay on message and stay on theme. You want to figure out where to get content. It doesn't have to be all original. There's a lot of great content out there that's being produced by others that you can link to in different ways. And it's really, really important that you put together what people call, a marketing person would call an editorial calendar. And there's an example here at the bottom of this slide, a content marketing calendar. Basically, you can just keep a list if you want. You know, what day you're going to post and where you're going to post, those kinds of things. Next slide. So you want to build a content creation engine that uses all the resources you have at your disposal. As you get into it a little more, each of the different tools, you'll find that some resources may fit a little better than others. But you can look outside your college, the center, your project. There's lots of industry news if you're involved in the technical fields especially. There's lots of different social conversations and groups you can join. You want to look inside what your sphere of influence is. You know, who are your peers? Who are the people that you're working with? You know, what are they posting? Maybe you can reuse and repurpose some of the content that they've been posting that they're finding. We'll talk about what evergreen resources are. You want to pay really, really close attention to copyright. I would try to stay away from copying content. And you want to, but you can link to somebody else's content on the web. So it's important that you do that whenever possible. Next slide. So here's some tips. These are some of the things that I do. You want to closely follow your industry news, whatever that industry or business is. So you can follow, you can find, you can do some searching on related organizations, different influencers in your field that are producing content, then you can use that to reinforce your messages. Okay, so you can reshare stuff basically. If you want, and I think it's important to do this, you can put your spin on the news. You can help it identify trends that are supporting some of your project key messages. And one of the tools I use pretty religiously now is Flipboard. I use that to aggregate RSS feeds. So I can basically set different topics in my Flipboard search and have those come up, and it's almost a magazine-like format. You can flip through the pages and look at different types of content based on what your search criteria are. Next slide. Here's an example of some content here, and this is out of El Centro College. I think we got this, some of it anyways. But a women in STEM example. A lot of us are in the STEM disciplines are looking to recruit and retain more women in our, in our fields, in our disciplines. So there's lots of different sources of information here, and this is just a few that are listed. iWits is Donna Milgram's organization out of California, which is very good. Girls Who Code, Girls in Technology. You can set Twitter filters with something called TweetDeck. I'll talk a little bit about TweetDeck in a bit. So there's lots of different options and opportunities to collect content. Next slide, Mike. And here's tip 2 to monitor social conversations. So if you're monitoring social conversations and you see something that applies to your to your goals and grant goals and objectives, let's say, you can repost that content from your audience, and you can use different comments from others, from participants, to generate new ideas. And I like to use things like TweetDeck. We're not going to have time to really go into a lot of detail on these things. To follow Twitter and filter Twitter. Something called Hootsuite for posting, Buffer, Sprout Social. These are all very interesting tools to take a look at. These will help you automate your postings and also filter the content that you'll be used for reposting, for example. Next slide. Here's an example of Polk State. Polk State is a community college in Florida, Lakeland, Florida, and they've sort of hit on this did you know type thing, or what can you do with $8,700 or $7,800, you can see on the right there. They're using this same image, which is sort of almost branded them in a way. This is for their computer technology and networking program. So, but you can see they've got different messages. These came off of Facebook, but they're using the same image. I thought that was very interesting, something to consider as you market your programs. Next slide. This next slide is just another example of a Polk State Facebook example. In this case, they're not using the image, the same image, but instead of just posting the article, they're putting sort of a clever little slogan in front of it. Forget Amazon delivery packages, I want one of these. So just another example. Next slide. Okay, tip 3 is to repurpose and reuse content. This is really easy. You want to, it's quick, easy. Once you find the content, it's very easy to reshare it and generate some engagement, just like Polk did earlier with those 3 examples we showed from Facebook. So they're using currently available and professionally developed content pieces, and they're just out collecting. They're collecting via things like RSS feeds with Flipboard, Twitter hashtags with TweetDeck, maybe you subscribe to some email newsletters, those kinds of things. So these are great places to get content. But again, you want to watch the copyright. What you want to do is if you retweet or you post, just like Polk did in those earlier examples, you want to link to it. Don't copy the content to your machine and then repost it, for example. You want to link to their content, to the source. Next slide. So here's some examples of some reusable content examples. El Centro College, they've got their student handbook that can be reposted. Another Polk State example where they've got a link to FBI's latest mission to trying to hire hackers. And this is Monroe Community College in New York State, lower left. It's just a Welcome Students Fall 2016 pick. Next slide. Okay, tip number 4 is to keep a supply of evergreen content. So evergreen content is basically content that doesn't get old. There's lots of different common content, evergreen content types, things like lists, top tips, instructional how-to tutorials, product reviews, videos. Infographics are really neat. I love infographics. And podcasts. You can even, if you want, you feel free to post my podcasts. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of some evergreen content. One of the greatest places you can go in the United States, if you're community college focused, and probably many of you have heard of ATETV.org. This is an NSF ATE funded project. Lots and lots of really, really good technician level content. And most recently, SCATE, the South Carolina ATE Center, collaborated on a project with ATETV, and they've got some tools out there now to make your own recruiting videos. This is just great stuff. You really should check this out. Again, ATETV.org if you haven't looked at it. And just a couple of other examples. the Dalai Lama quote, and an interesting quote on the right from a community college student in Massachusetts. Next slide. What evergreen content is not, you want to be really, really careful. It's not current event newsy type articles. It's not statistics or numericals things. Seasonal content like holidays, no. Current trendy kind of stuff, pop culture fads, probably not. A similar way, latest clothing and fashion trends. You want to avoid sports, professional sports anyways. Anything that appears dated, and also anything that's political or religious, definitely stay away from them. Next slide. So let's take a look at a few of the selected tools and posting frequencies. Next slide. And these are kind of in order in the way I like to use them anyways. I'm a big fan of Twitter. I'd recommend if you're using Twitter, 3 posts a day. And spread them out, or more, but I think 3 is a good target. You can see the upper left, the engagement decreases after the 3rd tweet. That comes from Social Bakers, and the lower right is an example from CUNY in New York. They've kind of integrated some of the Pokemon Go frenzy in their Twitter postings. Next slide. Facebook, 2 times a day at most. 2 times per day is a level before the likes and comments start to drop off dramatically. You can see here an interesting quote from Track Social. When a brand posts twice a day, the posts only receive 57% of the likes, 78% of the comments per post. And again, the drop-off continues as you post more during the day. Next slide. LinkedIn, probably 1 time a day. I like to think of LinkedIn as a resume. LinkedIn right now is trying to make themselves more look like Facebook, I think, so they get more re-engagement, people coming back several times a day. But most professional people are posting 1 time per day. That's about 20 posts per month, 1 time per weekday. And that'll allow you to reach around 60% of your audience. And that's right from LinkedIn's own small business guide. The source is linked there. Next slide. Snapchat. Snapchat is new. We saw only about 6% of you are using it. Probably 100% of your students are using it. If you're after a student market, you definitely want to take a close look at Snapchat. But 64% of internet users between 18 and 24 now use Snapchat. That's up from 24% in 2013. That's a ComScore stat. So definitely want to take a look at this. And they've recently implemented these Snapchat stories that would probably take us a whole nother webinar to talk about. It's very interesting. You should take a look at this. Next slide. Instagram is another biggie. You want to do 1.5 times per day or more. The major brands, if you look, that's what they're averaging. They found there's no drop-off in engagement for posting more, which is very interesting, provided you could keep up with the rate of posting. So that's a pretty interesting quote from Union Metrics. Next slide. Google Plus, if you're using it, I don't use this too much. I was at one time using it a lot, but 3 times per day at most. The more often you post with Google Plus, the more activity you'll get. Users have found a positive correlation between frequency and engagement. So when you drop off in frequency, your traffic's going to drop off with Google+. And again, these come from a couple different sources. Pinterest, okay, same thing, 5 times per day or more. So posting a lot on Pinterest appears to be a pretty good thing. Next slide. Blog, if you are blogging, I used to do a lot of blogging. I don't do too much anymore, but 2 times per week. Blogging takes up a lot of time, but 2 times per week is a good number, and that stat comes from HubSpot. Next. Okay, I'll turn it back to Ann now.
Thanks, Gordon. I can think of a bunch of questions for you as we get into the question time period, and I would encourage everyone else to go ahead and enter some questions in the question box because I think we're going to have plenty of time. We had a lot of slides, so we were being very careful that we are moving rather fast so that we could get through them, but I do think we're going to have some time for some questions at the end. We're going to talk right now about applying what looks easy, or maybe it doesn't look easy now if you haven't been doing it, to accomplishing project goals. It may not be a grant. It could be a project that you have that needs to be done. It could be something that you're doing in your department, within your college or university, or even in your high school. So let's go to the next slide. Again, there's some background and rationale here. In NSF speak, the motivating rationale is bullet number 2. Our background and the reason we felt qualified to do this is that between Joe and Gordon, and a little bit for me, we have a lot of background in social media experience and projects. But my part, the part I bring to it, is the administrative background of what it takes to get something done and get a program like this approved in your college. And that comes from my background as having been a dean in a couple of states and a VPAA in one state. Don't assume that you can just go do a social media campaign within your college or university without checking out to see what the policies are and so forth. And then the motivating rationale for why we need to do it. IT enrollments are going down a bit, and in some parts of the country they're going down a lot, in light of the fact that there is full IT employment. We're not quite as crazy as it was at the end of the 90s, where anybody who could spell IT pretty much got hired, but we are in a position where IT jobs are, we pretty well have full employment, and the employers are really hunting hard to find qualified personnel to fill the open spots. Next slide. So our framework, we have 3 institutions that, again, were out of 9 that applied that wanted to grow their IT enrollment. Each had a very different demographic goal, and each was a part of the Convergence Technology Center's Convergence College Network, which is that group of 57 colleges that is a community of practice. I'm going to call out the names of these institutions because they're all in their own way doing various pieces of work that are very notable. Polk State, of course, we got some of that. Their postings, you've already seen some of those. El Centro College in downtown Dallas, they're an inner city college, and we have seen some of their postings as well. And by the way, Polk State is in Florida, and they're more rural than not. And then we also have the University of North Texas, and they're in Denton, Texas, just outside of Dallas. Each was focusing on a different goal. At Polk State, they wanted to add enrollment, period, women, men, everyone. And at UNT, they wanted to add enrollment in their, what they call their BAIT degree, BA in IT, which takes a number of courses in transfer, a number of workforce courses in transfer toward getting a bachelor's in IT. And this is an academic degree, not a BAAS. So they were looking to grow that. And then El Centro College actually focused in on trying to grow their women. They wanted the number of women enrolled in their programs to grow. So their goals were a little bit different, but we're all sharing as a group at least once a month. And I am working with 2 of the teams, El Centro and Polk, and Gordon is working directly with UNT, while also being involved as a technical expert to help everybody on our project. We started out with workshops in Massachusetts, and those workshops actually had a little bit of pre-work for the teams, and the teams worked together at those workshops and came up with a social media plan. And when I talk about the team, there were 2 people at least for each college or each university that came, and in a couple of cases we had the director of PR involved, which was very interesting. Next slide. Here's an example of a social media plan. You notice it is a revised social media plan. I actually don't even remember which institution's plan I'm now showing you. It really doesn't matter. But the point is, the plan was to have Facebook 2 times a day, and the days were listed. Twitter 2 times a day. Instagram was not a tool that this group was going to use. YouTube a couple of times a month, and LinkedIn 2 times a day. These were the plans that actually were not the original plan. This was the first revision of their plan. Another thing I would say is that it's important to be willing to adjust. If you had grandiose plans in the beginning and you find that it absolutely cannot be done, then it's reasonable to adjust and figure out what to do. It's also reasonable to adjust based on analytics. If what you're doing is not working, then it's reasonable to adjust the plan and do something different. Okay, next slide. Here's an example of tracking, and here's an example of the number of posts that actually happen. We ran into all sorts of interesting issues. As we get to the next slide or two, we'll talk about some of those. But let it be said that, again, that this is more than a technical issue. Learning to use the tools is necessary for sure, but it's not necessarily sufficient to get the plan executed as it was originally scheduled. The time taken is quite a bit more than what I imagined, and I think it's more than what some of the other people imagined. And then we had to get administrative approvals in many cases, and there were still administrative limitations. Next slide. Here's a little more of the tracking, and you'll see that the actual posts fell a little bit short. This is a research pilot, and we're learning as we go. Next slide. Okay, getting approval for social media does have to be supported through the college's administration. This is a big deal in some colleges. I think that there have been enough times that the colleges have been embarrassed that they're beginning, many of them, especially the larger ones, are beginning to be very, very particular about who can post what. Some of the barriers are that there are institutional policies in some cases that in fact can prohibit you having any kind of initiative on a departmental level. That's definitely a problem if you're trying to push departmental issues or departmental goals. But I do understand that oftentimes, especially in larger colleges, that the PR department takes care of the postings, and they are more what I would call overall postings that draw people to the college. Also, the staff to do the work is not in the budget, and it's okay to think about it being layered on, except it really can't be layered on because it requires quite a bit of time. Also, whatever content you put out could potentially become controversial. We'll talk about that a little more as we go a little bit further. Next slide. Again, it's very good to have PR and marketing involved. Again, the larger colleges, oftentimes PR controls all the messaging, and it's more overall messaging for the college. And some do allow the departments to have their own messaging, but the staff are on their own. They have to do the work, they have to put it together, they have to figure it out, and I'm quite sure that if in fact there was anything objectionable, that the department would be criticized for that. So I'm sure that the PR departments are monitoring what the departments are doing, where the departments are actually doing the postings. And again, we'll talk about one particular example that could have been a problem that was avoided. Let's look to the next slide. Messaging. Again, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I'm a techie. Most of us are probably techies or working with techies. I never had a marketing course. By being a woman in IT, I know sort of what works with women and girls in IT, but the messaging is not my forte. Also, too, I had not thought about it, but the messaging varies significantly by demographic. I do know that I'm better off if I have something to recruit high school women. I'm better off getting a younger college student to carry the message than me. I look like their grandmother. I would like to be 30 again too, Gordon, but that's not going to happen. Also, too, the messages that attract a particular age range in a demographic, such as younger women, is not going to attract older women, nor will it attract men and vice versa. I will call out Polk State. Cliff Bennett, who's handling it down there, is doing a great job. And he and I talk very regularly about the messaging. He wanted to, for example, attract women. Definitely wanted to attract women. So he was going to talk about giving a competition team. They're going to have some kind of a competitive event in October in IT. He was going to give the team extra points if they would put a woman on the team. Well, on face value, that looks like it might be okay. However, it sort of says the implication is that putting a woman on a team puts you at a disadvantage. Therefore, we'll give you extra points because you put a woman on the team. And he had not thought about that at all. I actually did think about it because I've been involved in something where that was the case, and I happen to be the woman. But who would think that through? I don't know that they have done it there, but they were thinking, they're in rural Florida, they were thinking about putting a server stack in the backside of a pickup truck and using that as one of their images. Well, that might work with men. I don't know that it would work with all women, might work with some, and I don't know that it would work with older women or older men. Maybe it would. I don't really know. But the point is you have to be very, very careful about the messaging. Now, we've had some subject matter experts help us, and those were from the original new media project that EDC did, and also they're friends of Gordon's that he's known for years. We're also going to work with some role models for the target demographics. We're working with them on Friday, actually tomorrow. So we will work on that, and we'll keep you informed about what goes on. Next slide. Again, the time. It takes hours, not a couple of minutes a week. And if we have a regular job that is an extensive regular job, it's pretty difficult to layer this on without some kind of help. Although there are automation tools that cause the postings to be easier on multiple platforms, that can help out, but it's still a major commitment. And oftentimes there's a single champion, I'm going to call it a champion, who's responsible for the work, and that person has no backup. And if something unexpected happens, then there's a problem. Next slide. And then, unfortunately, really horrible unforeseen events happen. In early July at El Centro College, 5 police officers were ambushed and killed, and the assassin was eliminated at that location. The assassin, I don't know how many of you followed the news, but they actually had to use a robot with a bomb for various reasons to take care of the assassin. And what happened then was a major disruption for the people in the college. Of course it was emotional, of course it was tragic, but there was also a major disruption in their facilities and equipment that they needed for the work. The server room was severely damaged, as were a couple of the IT labs. Now, we couldn't have planned for that, they didn't plan for that, but posting on social media was the furthest from their mind for the month of July. Plus, vacations do happen, and if you have only one person, we didn't think about vacations possibly being in a location without internet access, so that caused a problem. Illnesses can happen also. If someone gets severely ill, then they're out for several weeks. Again, it's usually single-threaded, so there's one person doing the work, and if the vacation or the serious illness happens to that one person, then that could be a problem. And you could have key people leave, though we have not had that situation at this point. Okay, I'm going to turn it over on the next slide to Joe Ippolito. Joe, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Quickly, Education Development Center is an education and research development organization. It's headquartered just outside of Boston. We have more than 250 projects spread across the United States and throughout the world. My work at EDC is focused on defining new and emerging occupations, as well as new and emerging workplace skills. As Ann mentioned, I am the PI for the research project that has been referenced during the webinar. I was also the project director of another NSF project, the New Media Technician Project, which was able to develop a lot of the products that served as the foundation for the work that's been described so far. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do, and I'll do it as briefly as possible, there are a number of materials that have been created by both projects. All of these products are available at a site that will be listed at the end of the webinar. We have found that working in both projects that these provide a very easy to follow but very comprehensive way of tackling social media. So next slide. Okay, this is a page from the profile of a social technology enabled professional. The New Media Technician Project was geared towards trying to identify who individuals were that were emerging in a variety of industries that were using social media to build a business brand. So in order to do that, we convened a panel of social media experts. These were experts who included small business entrepreneurs. We had a representative from IBM. We had academicians. And together over a two-day process, they developed this schematic that identifies the major work responsibilities and the variety of tasks that somebody who is using social media to build a business or organizational brand needs to be able to perform in order to do that successfully. In addition to identifying all of these work activities, the expert panel also identified the skills, the knowledge, and the behaviors that enable an individual to do this job. Next slide. Okay, the profile, that profile that identifies the work and the enablers to do the job is the foundation of all the other products that have been created since then. The first product that we created after the profile was a series of performance-based rubrics. The performance-based rubrics provide incremental examples of what the skills and activities that a social technology-enabled professional does, what those activities look like at 4 different levels of proficiency. The rubrics are aligned to the profile, and they provide the basis for doing performance-based assessment both within industry and in an academic setting. Next slide. Oh, okay. Actually, there's a couple others that I don't have a slide for. So in addition to the profile and the rubrics, we also have 3 comprehensive problem-based lessons that are, again, they're geared towards the profile and the rubrics. They are built around real-life problem scenarios that were created by the expert panel that we had who created the profile and the rubrics. And they offer both a teacher and a student version. They include step-by-step guidance to solving the problem scenario, and that involves activities to guide students through the solution of the problem, templates and worksheets, and a variety of additional resources. This last slide is actually, so the products I've identified there are products that were generated by the initial project. Those products, Ann mentioned the workshops that we held with the teams from the 3 colleges, with members of the expert panel and the products that I've briefly described. We worked with the colleges to create the social media plans that they are now implementing. In order to help them do that, we created a social media planning guide. Again, this is also available at the link that you see on the slide there. The social media planning guide offers, it filters out the best thinking of these panel members, and in a very logical, I think easy to follow, step-by-step manner, shows you how to put together a social media strategy by guiding you with a series of questions that will help you think about the target audience, the type of tools that you need to use, the kind of messaging that you need to put together, and then it provides an easy way of actually collecting that all together so that you can follow it and evaluate your progress as you're going along. I think that's it. Next slide. Yeah.
These are resources or references, or Gordon, you can talk about it. But these are places to go to get more input.
Yeah, these are some things that I've picked up, and we did have some questions, and I apologize for not getting to them when I was presenting, but we can cover them now if you want. I think the next slide is questions.
The next slide is actually our contact information, but okay. You can flip on through that because these slides will be posted,
sure.
And
There's
we
a lot
can
of
move
good
on
links
to
here.
The questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Why don't you let Mike filter the questions and give us the questions? How's that?
Sure, that's good.
Thank you very much, Gordon and Ann and Joe. Thanks for that. People are just, I'm amazed at all this stuff. First of all, isn't it interesting, Gordon, you mentioned that in our poll, 6% of us use Snapchat, 100% of people under 24 use it, and I don't even know what it is. So there's a problem. There's a real fundamental problem here. But that aside, does it cost money for these tools that allow you to automate your posting? And by the way, how does automating your posting work? I'm not sure I understand that.
Well, you can schedule, using things like Hootsuite, for example. You can go in and schedule a post.
So like a 7 a.m. on Monday or something, you mean?
Yeah, like setting an alarm clock almost. But I think everything I posted there is free. There's free versions. Hootsuite Pro, I think, is $10 a month. A lot of people don't like the fact that you have to pay for it. But if you're doing a lot of this stuff, it's probably worth it. So, but most of the content there's free versions of all of it, basically.
There's a very relevant question that just came into the question window, and it has to do, and of course, in today's world, IT security with us at community colleges and other folks, other areas. Are there security issues that you deal with when you're using other people's tools or any of these tools? And have you run into that? Gordon, I'll start with you.
I think there's always security issues. You want to be careful what you do and what you post. We're seeing some of that in the political world right now.
Yeah.
So people are going to try to hack you. People can try to take over your account. Somebody tried to get into my Google account just this morning, for example. I'm not sure where or who, but luckily I have strong passwords. So the most important thing I think with this stuff is to follow the basic rules you follow with your email accounts and everything else. When you set up accounts, you want to set passwords. You want the passwords to be strong, and you want to change them on a regular basis. That's about all you can do these days. I wish there was more.
Well, I know what we do is we keep an eye on these things. Suddenly there's stuff, and you're thinking, where did this come from? And
yeah, you can set up two-step authentication with most of these, where you'll get if somebody tries to get in and do something, you'll get a text message.
However, let me interrupt here just a minute. On Facebook, I have been not hacked, but I have been duplicated. Your photo on Facebook and my photo on Facebook can easily be lifted, and another Ann Behealer was created, and my friends list is, at least the way I have it set up, people can see it. And so they started sending out friend requests to my friends, and some of them were like, we're already friends, what's she doing? So they actually contacted me via other means, but they didn't hack a thing. But what they started doing was trying to sell things to all of my friends as though they were me.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's
Interesting.
a pretty common thing.
It's very common, very common. But I contacted Facebook. They took the other site down or the other person down immediately. Well, like in a day or two. But on that one, there's no password. I mean, that's kind of scary.
Let me ask you one more question about that, then we're going to move on to a lot of questions about metrics today, but let me close on tools by asking the following. Let's see if I can get this question right. You want to encourage people to post, for example, on your Facebook site, right? You want to encourage other people to post, and yet you just don't want the world there. So do you say you're going to review everything? Do you make people go through hoops to post on your site? Or do you let them post and then filter then? How do you manage something like that? Gordon, let's start with you, and then I'll ask Ann and Joe to comment too.
I'm kind of a open source type person, so I believe you keep the content as open as possible, and if you have to filter, you filter. But I don't think I've ever had to really filter anything. And I'm thinking back. I have not had to do that, and it's over 10 years of experience with this material now.
All right. What about you, Ann? Do you allow people to put things on your sites? Do you filter?
Sure.
What do you do? You're open.
Sure.
You're open.
We're open. However, we also have a group, a Facebook group, that people have for the center. And the Facebook group, they have to ask to be admitted to using that group.
Yeah.
But that is more for a community of practice type of event as opposed to just general overall postings to get more people to come to our programs.
Okay. What about your experience, Joe?
Well, maybe this actually this gets at some of what Ann was talking about. Certainly, I have very limited experience in actually monitoring what's going on the social media sites that we use. Our project social media is essentially run by a colleague of mine, and she will filter out anything that seems inappropriate. But we're part of a much larger organization, and so for me or for any of our projects to be able to post something on the more universal EDC site, there are hoops that we have to go through. It basically has to get approved through different people.
That's good. I think what Ann was really talking about was a form of doxing, D-O-X-I-N-G. If you've heard of that term, but it's people will go out and release your personally identifiable information, your PII, and that can be very dangerous. You start publishing people's home addresses and phone numbers and pictures of their kids and stuff. So you want to definitely be careful with this stuff.
Yeah, definitely watch your security settings, and make sure that personal information, at least be aware of what personal information that you individually allow out there. Of course, when we have an account that is for a grant, that's a little bit different because we want everybody to know about us.
Well, good. Thank you all for that. Now let's move. We were talking about tools and security. Let's move into metrics. And I think today we have the most questions that come about metrics. Let me start with you, Ann. This question is a simple one in a sense. What's the best thing to do? What type of social media tools are the most beneficial? And how do you know? Do you have a sense there? I'll start with you, Ann, and then move to Gordon with that same question.
Well, you're going to find that Gordon knows a whole lot more about this than I do, but what we do is, and we do have postings. I have actually a person who is a web content editor who posts every single day. I guess she needs to post more than every single day, multiple times per day. But we use the analytics that are with whatever the tool is. And what we have learned is, in our case, what gets the biggest number of hits and the highest level of engagement is when we post something that came from somebody else. For example, the IT salaries for the year, or predictions for earnings into the future, or maybe predictions for numbers of openings and jobs into the future. Those kinds of things are extremely important. We get lots and lots of hits on it. So when we have something like that out there, we go ahead and put our message along with it, because that way our message gets consumed as well. If we talk about something, however wonderful, that we're doing within our center, sometimes it's ho-hums, and I guess it also kind of depends on the day. You notice that at least one of the social media plans, they weren't posting on Friday. How many faculty do you know that work the whole day on Friday? If you're going after faculty, that's probably not what you want to do. If you're going after people in general, it might be what you do want to do. Again, we just use the analytics that are with the tools, and we make our judgments based on that. But on this project, we kept a baseline, the social media pilot project. We kept a baseline for each college in what was their registration in their IT courses last fall of 2015, and we are at this moment, as we speak, gathering the data for this fall, and that actually is going to go on into the second half of the fall semester, because some of us have courses that start the second half of fall, and we will be comparing the actual numbers of what our numbers are this year versus last year, and additionally, we're asking the students, how did they hear about the programs?
I see. So hopefully then you'll
Mike,
be able to
can I jump in just real quick with that?
Yeah, would you please, Joe?
Yeah, I just want to say that's my observation in the case with the three colleges that are involved in the current project, that the two major challenges I see that, well, there are a lot of them, but two of the major challenges that they are facing have to do with crafting messages that are engaging to their target audience. And then secondly, I would say actually is using social analytics in a way that enhances their strategy. And again, what I think I've seen is that, and what I would emphasize is that we have really benefited so far in having individuals who are subject matter experts who have this kind of strange combination of kind of the artistry of being able to craft a marketing message along with the technical know-how and the ability to identify which of the platforms is best going to deliver the message you want to your target audience. Having people like that as consultants cannot be undervalued.
Well, thanks for that comment,
I agree.
Joe.
Yeah.
Let me turn now to Gordon with an important question. I want to demonstrate some of my grant outcomes using social media, and one of my outcomes is to engage the community that I'm working with. I want to engage them because I know that will help my dissemination. So Gordon,
Sure.
How do I measure engagement? Because I want to report that to the National Science Foundation. How do I measure engagement?
Yeah, in the last couple of minutes here, I did link, you've got the slide up now, additional references. That first article is a really good article on social media metrics. And what that does, it's from Sprout Social, it goes through the different tools, and they sort of aggregate different engagement and metrics from the different tools. Every tool does it a little differently. You know, one of the ones I've been watching really closely is Snapchat. You mentioned that earlier. With Snapchat, you can send out a snap to somebody or a group of friends, and it'll self-destruct once somebody looks at it. They just started this stories option, where you can put up a story and sort of string snaps together. And people can look at those for up to 24 hours. And the story can be ongoing. So even if one of the snaps expires after 24 hours, if you posted something else subsequent to that, that'll go its own 24 hours. And what Snapchat is doing, they're kind of gaming the system. You get what's called a snap score. People aren't quite sure how Snapchat is calculating this, but it's a combination of all kinds of different metrics that Snapchat is using, and it's very interesting. They've gamed the system in a very similar way that Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go is another very interesting thing to take a look at, whether you're a Pokemon fan or not. It's kind of gaming the system in different ways, and we're going to see a lot more of this kind of stuff where you're just not seeing your own metrics. Your metrics are being exposed, or they're available for other people to see. It's a very interesting time with some of these interactive services, and I think the location-based stuff with Pokemon is really going to take off.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Gordon. You know, for our presenters, we're right at our time today. It's been a fascinating hour to be talking about this stuff. So many questions. I wonder about benchmarks. I wonder if 36 tweets a day is good, or if 14 likes is bad. Anyhow, that's a whole nother discussion. Final question. I hope all three of you would welcome connections from some of our audience to learn more about these things and maybe help.
Sure.
Let me click over to the contact slide. Good, thank you. There that you can see Gordon at Gmail and at Colin and Joe at EDC. One of our presenters asked, you know, are we getting, there's a lot of links here. They weren't copying down the links. Well, sure, as the slides come to you, you can just click on the links themselves. Wrapping up for today, let me tell you, while we did our questions, our next webinar in the series is October 13th. You're going to find out about strategies for business engagement. And look, that famous second presenter, boy, we can't wait to hear from him. Sorry, Ann, I couldn't resist Ann on that one. But connections with business and industries are important to all of us. Folks, as you leave the webinar today, popping up in another window, a window will open up in a couple of questions. That helps us demonstrate our efficacy of these webinars to our funder, the National Science Foundation, and also helps us improve. So today, thank you very much for joining. Fascinating topic. Joe and Gordon, thank you very much for presenting today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And everyone, that officially ends our webinar for today. I'm going to close the recording. You will get the recording link. Thanks again for joining. Goodbye, everyone.